To truly understand the legend of Elon Musk, to truly grasp the sheer, terrifying magnitude of what happened in December of 2008, you have to strip away everything you know about him today. You have to forget the $200 billion. You have to forget the applause, the magazine covers, the army of fans, and the image of the invincible Iron Man who snaps his fingers and buys social media networks. You have to go back to a moment in time when Elon Musk was not a titan, but a ghost. A man walking through the valley of the shadow of death, broke, humiliated, divorced, and staring into an abyss so deep and so dark that it threatened to swallow not just his fortune but his sanity. The year 2008 was not just a bad year for business. It was the year the world ended. It was the year the financial tectonic plates of the entire planet shifted and crushed everything in between. The global financial crisis was ripping through the economy like a hurricane. Lehman Brothers, a banking institution that had stood for over a century, collapsed overnight, vanishing into thin air and taking the world's confidence with it. The housing market, the bedrock of the American dream, disintegrated into dust. Credit markets froze solid. Banks stopped lending money to Fortune 500 companies, let alone risky cash-burning startups run by a crazy internet millionaire. The automotive industry in Detroit, the mighty General Motors and Chrysler, was on its knees, begging the government for a bailout just to keep the lights on for one more month. And in the middle of this economic apocalypse, in the eye of this perfect storm, Elon Musk was standing on the deck of two sinking ships, trying to bail them out with a teaspoon. He had invested almost every single dollar from the sale of PayPal, roughly $180 million, into SpaceX and Tesla. He went all in before all in was a cool poker term. He didn't keep a safety net. He didn't keep $10 million for a rainy day. He poured it all into the mission, and by late 2008, the tank was empty. The liquidity was gone, vaporized by exploded rockets and delayed cars. He was literally borrowing money from friends just to pay his rent and keep food on the table for his children. Imagine the psychological horror of that. Imagine going from being the wunderkind of Silicon Valley, the man who revolutionized payments, to asking your buddies for a loan so you don't get evicted. His personal life was mirroring the global chaos with brutal precision. He was going through a public, nasty, and excruciatingly painful divorce from his first wife, Justine. The tabloids were feasting on his misery, painting him as a playboy, a failure, a man whose ego had written checks his bank account couldn't cash. He was living in a rented house because he had sold his assets to fund the companies. He was waking up in the middle of the night screaming, not metaphorically screaming, literally screaming in terror. He would wake up chest pounding, soaked in sweat, heart racing at 200 beats per minute, looking at the dark ceiling and realizing that the math didn't work. He had weeks, maybe days of cash left. He was physically deteriorating before the eyes of his staff. His eyes were sunken deep into his skull, surrounded by dark circles of exhaustion. His skin was gray and clammy. He had developed a chronic, agonizing stomach pain that wouldn't go away, a physical manifestation of the stress that was eating him alive from the inside out. He later described this period with a quote that has become famous, but few understand the visceral reality of it. Starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. In 2008, Elon wasn't just staring into the abyss, he was falling into it, and the glass was cutting his throat. The pressure was suffocating. Every morning he had to put on a suit, walk into the Tesla and SpaceX offices, and project confidence to his terrified employees. He had to look engineers in the eye, men and women with families, with mortgages, with kids to feed, and tell them that everything was going to be fine, that the funding was coming, that the mission was safe. He had to lie to them to keep them focused, while inside his head, a siren was screaming, "Emergency! Emergency! We are dead!" He was fighting a war on multiple fronts against the most powerful forces on Earth. He was fighting the global economy. He was fighting the skeptics in the media who wanted him to fail. He was fighting the established aerospace and automotive industries that wanted to crush him, and he was fighting the laws of physics themselves. And he was losing. On all fronts. He was watching the calendar days tick by like a countdown timer on a nuclear bomb. December was approaching. The end of the year was the deadline. If he didn't close a funding round by Christmas, checks would bounce, the doors would be locked, the equipment would be auctioned off. The dream of Mars would die in a bankruptcy court. The dream of electric cars would become a footnote in a business textbook about why you don't start a car company in Silicon Valley. He was standing on the edge of a cliff with the wind howling around him, and the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. This wasn't just a business crisis. This was an existential crisis. This was a man facing the total annihilation of his life's work, his reputation, and his future. And as the winter set in, the darkness was closing in from all sides, suffocating, relentless, and cold. This is the story of the darkest hour before the dawn, the moment when the hero is stripped of his armor and forced to fight naked in the snow. If the crushing financial pressure of the global economic collapse wasn't enough to break a man's soul, there was the humiliation. The relentless, public, and vicious humiliation that Elon Musk had to endure every single day of 2008. Today, we look at Elon and see a figure who commands the attention of presidents and markets, but back then, he was not a hero. He was not a genius. He was a punchline. He was a walking joke in Silicon Valley and a despised interloper in Detroit. The media environment at the time was toxic, and Elon was their favorite target. A popular tech gossip site called Valleywag, which was the Bible of the tech industry at the time, ran a recurring, gleeful series called the Tesla Death Watch. They would literally post countdown clocks predicting the exact day, hour, and minute when Tesla Motors would file for bankruptcy. They celebrated every setback with the enthusiasm of an executioner sharpening his axe. They treated Elon not like a visionary trying to save the planet, but like a delusional con artist who was scamming investors with a fantasy about electric cars. They painted him as a rich dilettante, a dot-com lucky winner who was burning money on toys because he was bored. And the devastating truth, the thing that kept Elon up at night staring at the ceiling, was that Tesla was giving them plenty of ammunition. The Tesla Roadster, the car that was supposed to be the spearhead of the revolution, the car that was supposed to prove that electric vehicles could be sexy and fast, was an absolute, unmitigated disaster behind the scenes. It was a beautiful shell with a nightmare inside. The car was originally promised to cost around $80,000 to manufacture, leaving a healthy margin for the company. But a deep dive into the chaotic supply chain revealed a horrifying reality. It cost nearly $120,000 to build a single unit. They were losing $40,000 on every single car they sold. It was a business model designed for instant suicide, and the cars didn't even work properly. The transmission was the Achilles heel. The immense torque of the electric motor was shredding the gears like they were made of cheese. They tried one transmission supplier, then another, then a third. Everything broke. The battery cooling system was a complex mess of tubes and potential fires. The carbon fiber body panels, which were being made in France, were arriving with inconsistent gaps and warping. Customers who had put down deposits years ago, famous people, wealthy people, were furious. They were calling the office, screaming, demanding refunds that Elon simply didn't have because he had already spent the cash on R&D. Inside the company, the atmosphere was poisonous. Martin Eberhard, the original CEO and co-founder, had been ousted in a bloody boardroom coup that left half the staff loyal to him and hating Elon. Elon had to step in as CEO, a job he didn't initially want, just to stop the bleeding. But by taking the wheel of the sinking ship, he put a giant target on his own back. He was now the face of the failure. The automotive experts in Detroit, the car guys at GM, Ford, and Lutz, were laughing their heads off in their boardrooms. They were popping champagne. To them, Tesla's failure was vindication. They said, "See, we told you. You can't build a car company in Silicon Valley. You can't use laptop batteries to power a vehicle. It's physics." It's impossible. They viewed Elon as an arrogant software nerd who thought he could rewrite the rules of a 100-year-old industry, and they were delighted to watch him crash. The popular British TV show Top Gear reviewed the roadster, and showed it running out of charge and being pushed by mechanics, a scene Elon later sued over, claiming it was staged to humiliate them. But the damage was done. The public perception was set. Electric vehicles were glorified golf carts for rich hippies. They would leave you stranded. And Elon Musk was the ringleader of a circus. He was being attacked from all sides. The political left attacked him for being a billionaire playing with toys while the economy collapsed. The political right attacked him for seeking government loans, which hadn't even arrived yet, and for pushing a green agenda. He felt like an imposter. He describes moments during that year where he would be driving his car alone on the highway, and he would just zone out, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of negative energy directed at him. He started to doubt his own sanity. He would ask his brother Kimball, "Am I crazy? Is everyone else right? Am I defrauding these people? Am I lying to myself?" The psychological toll of being a national laughingstock is hard to quantify. It erodes your confidence. It makes you paranoid. Most CEOs in his position would have folded. They would have declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy, blamed the unprecedented economic crisis, saved their remaining millions, and retired to a private island to lick their wounds. Nobody would have blamed him. The headwinds were impossible. But Elon couldn't fold. He was possessed by the mission. He truly believed that without Tesla, the electric car revolution would be delayed by 20 years, and the climate crisis would become irreversible. So he endured the mockery. He read the articles predicting his demise. He read the comments calling him a fraud, and he swallowed the bile. He went to work every single day while the world pointed and laughed, putting on a brave face for his employees, knowing that the only way to shut them up was to survive. But survival looked increasingly impossible. The wolves were at the door, they were hungry, and the barricades were breaking. He was alone, isolated, and running out of time, while the chorus of "I told you so" grew louder with every passing day. While Tesla was bleeding to death on the ground, struggling with transmissions that shredded themselves and investors who were plotting coups, SpaceX was busy exploding in the sky. If 2008 was a financial nightmare for Tesla, it was an emotional tragedy for SpaceX. The company had been founded 6 years earlier with the noble, almost holy goal of making space affordable for humanity, but so far they had only produced debris, smoke, and charred metal. The track record was abysmal. The first launch in 2006 failed after just 30 seconds due to a fuel leak and a fire, crashing into the reef. The second launch in 2007 failed after stage separation due to a control loop error, spinning out of control like a broken toy and dying in the upper atmosphere. Now, in August 2008, everything, literally everything, rode on Flight 3. This was it. There was no plan B. There was no secret bank account. Elon had brought in investors. He had promised them success, and he had poured his own dwindling fortune into this rocket. The Falcon 1 sat on the launch pad in Omelek Island, a tiny, remote speck of land in the Pacific Ocean that was so isolated the engineers had to live there for weeks like castaways. The payload on board was significant. It carried satellites for the U.S. Department of Defense, NASA experiments, and most heartbreakingly, the cremated remains of James Doohan, the beloved actor who played Scotty on the original Star Trek. Millions of fans were watching. The pressure was so intense it was physical. The launch began perfectly. The countdown reached 0, the Merlin engine ignited, and the rocket cleared the tower with a roar that shook the palm trees. It climbed into the blue sky, piercing the clouds. The first stage burned beautifully for 2.5 minutes. The team in the control trailer, huddled around their monitors in board shorts and t-shirts, started to cheer. Elon, watching from the command center, felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the curse was broken. Maybe this would be the win that saved them. Then, at the exact moment of stage separation, disaster struck. It was a failure of agonizingly small margins. The first stage engine shut down as planned, but there was a tiny amount of residual thrust, a little bit of extra push left in the nozzle. Because the separation timing was set just a fraction of a second too tight, The first stage didn't fall away cleanly. Instead, it lunged forward and rear-ended the second stage. It was a fender bender in space. The impact sent the rocket into an uncontrollable, violent spin. The video feed from the onboard camera showed the horizon spinning wildly, Earth and sky blurring together in a sickening vortex. Then, the feed cut out. Silence. Absolute dead silence fell over the control room. The rocket, the military satellites, and Scotty's ashes disintegrated in the atmosphere or fell into the ocean. The dream was gone. Grown men began to weep openly. These were hardened engineers who had spent years on this island, away from their families, working 100-hour weeks in the salt spray and humidity, and they had just watched their baby die for the third time. It wasn't just a technical failure. It felt like a funeral for the company. Elon had enough money for 3 launches. He had just blown the third one. By all conventional logic, by every rule of business and finance, SpaceX was dead. The employees knew it. They stared at their screens or put their heads in their hands. They were stranded on a tropical island, exhausted, sunburnt, and defeated. They expected Elon to walk in and announce the layoffs. They expected him to say, "We tried, but it's over." They expected the dream to end right there, in that trailer. But this is where the legend of the Iron Man was truly forged, in the fires of absolute failure. Elon Musk walked out of the command trailer. He didn't look defeated. He didn't look like a man who had just lost tens of millions of dollars. He looked fierce. He looked possessed. He gathered the weeping, broken team around him. He looked them in the eyes red from crying, and delivered a speech that people who were there still talk about today with reverence. He didn't sugarcoat it. He said, "We knew this was going to be hard. It is rocket science. It is the hardest thing in the world." But then his voice hardened. He said, "For my part, I will never give up. I mean it. Never." The word hung in the air like a vow. He told them that he had secured an investment, which was a bluff, or a half-truth, or a desperate hope, to fund one more launch. He told them to get back to work immediately. He ordered them to find out exactly what went wrong, fix the timing code, and prep the spare rocket parts for Flight 4. He told them they were going to launch again in weeks, not months. The shift in energy was instantaneous and supernatural. The despair turned into a manic, terrified resolve. They went from planning their resumes to planning the next launch within minutes. It was a masterclass in leadership, but it was also a gamble of insane, reckless proportions. Elon didn't actually have the money to sustain the company if Flight 4 failed. He was betting the last scraps of his net worth, the last pennies of his PayPal fortune, on a single roll of the dice. He was cannibalizing parts from a test vehicle to build the fourth rocket. The timeline was compressed from months to 6 weeks. The stress was unimaginable. If Flight 4 blew up, SpaceX would be a smoking crater in history, a cautionary tale about hubris, and Elon Musk would be the man who burned $200 million to create a fireworks display for the fish in the Pacific. He was doubling down when he should have walked away. He was betting his life on a machine that had never worked. By December 2008, the adrenaline from the SpaceX speech had faded, replaced by a cold, hard, and terrifying reality. The situation had distilled into a mathematically impossible choice, a logic puzzle designed by the devil himself. Despite the miraculous technical success of reaching orbit in September, SpaceX was not yet profitable. It was burning cash just to keep the lights on. Tesla was in even worse shape. It was hemorrhaging money, bleeding out from every pore due to the Roadster's cost overruns and the delayed deliveries. Elon Musk sat in his rented house, surrounded by boxes and silence, and looked at his bank account. He had roughly $30 million left to his name. That was it. That was the sum total of his life's work, the last scraps of the PayPal fortune. He did the math, and the math was a death sentence. To guarantee the survival of SpaceX, he needed to inject about $30 million. To guarantee the survival of Tesla, he needed to inject about $30 million. He had enough money to save one child. If he gave the money to Tesla, SpaceX would die immediately. The team on the island would be fired, the rockets would rust, and humanity's chance to become multiplanetary, the dream that woke him up every morning, would be extinguished. If he gave the money to SpaceX, Tesla would go bankrupt. The creditors would liquidate the assets. The electric car revolution would be delayed by decades, and he would be branded a failure who couldn't run a car company. He walked around his house like a ghost, muttering to himself, trapped in a loop of indecision. He asked his closest friends for advice. They all told him the same thing. They were rational, smart people, and they gave him the rational, smart answer. Pick one. You have to pick one. If you split the money, you will likely lose both. It was the lifeboat ethics problem. You have two drowning people and only enough strength to save one. If you try to save both, you all drown. But Elon is not a rational businessman. He is a pathological optimist. He is a man who looks at the laws of probability and decides they don't apply to him. He couldn't bring himself to kill one of his dreams. He loved them both too much. He decided to do the unthinkable. He decided to split the money. He decided to push all his chips into the center of the table on a pair of twos. He knew it was suicide. He knew the odds of both companies surviving on half rations were near zero. But he refused to choose. So he embarked on a frantic, desperate scramble to find more money to fill the gap. He started calling everyone he knew. He begged investors. He leveraged everything. He even tried to borrow money against his cousin's solar company, Solar City, to create liquidity. He was scraping the bottom of the barrel. The stress was physically eating him alive. He was vomiting from anxiety in the mornings. He lost so much weight that his clothes hung off his frame like he was a scarecrow. His hair started thinning rapidly. He looked 20 years older than he was. This was not a billionaire playing a 4D chess game. This was a man fighting for his soul, hanging off a cliff by his fingernails. He later said, "I felt like I was on the Titanic, and I had a bucket, and I was trying to bail the water out while the ship was going down." And as if the internal pressure wasn't enough, he faced external sabotage. The investors at Tesla were not all friends. One investment firm in particular, Vantage Point Capital Partners, led by Alan Salzman, smelled blood in the water. They saw that Elon was desperate. They decided to play a brutal game of corporate hardball. Vantage Point deliberately tried to stall the funding round. Their plan was diabolical. They wanted to force Tesla into bankruptcy. Why? Because if Tesla went bankrupt, they could oust Elon Musk as CEO, take control of the company for pennies on the dollar, and sell the intellectual property to a giant like GM or Toyota for a quick profit. It was a hostile takeover disguised as due diligence. It was corporate murder. Elon realized what they were doing. He realized that the very people who were supposed to be his partners were trying to kill him. He had to outmaneuver them, rewriting the entire financing deal hours before the deadline to bypass their veto power. It became a high-stakes poker game played with the last dollars of his life, with the fate of sustainable energy hanging in the balance. He had to convince existing investors to put in more money, knowing that if he failed, they would lose everything too. He had to lie to them, or at least project a confidence he didn't feel, telling them that the bridge to safety was solid when he knew it was made of toothpicks. The days leading up to Christmas were a blur of lawyers, shouting matches, sleepless nights, and the crushing weight of knowing that one single mistake, one missed phone call, one hesitation would result in total, irreversible ruin. He was fighting the banks, the economy, the saboteurs, and his own exhaustion, all at once. December 24th, 2008. Christmas Eve. This was the deadline. If the deals didn't close by the end of the business day, payroll would bounce, the companies would be insolvent, and the game would be over. Elon woke up that morning knowing that this was likely the last day of his career as a tech visionary. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. At SpaceX, they were waiting on a miracle from NASA. They had bid for a commercial resupply services contract to ferry cargo to the International Space Station. It was a long shot. NASA rarely trusted startups, especially ones that had blown up 3 rockets in a row. But Flight 4 had reached orbit, and that single success was their only bargaining chip. Elon sat by the phone, waiting. The silence was deafening. Then the call came. A NASA administrator was on the line. They weren't just calling to say hello. They were awarding SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract for 12 resupply flights. $1.6 billion. It was the biggest Christmas present in the history of aerospace. It saved the company instantly. It went from zero to hero in a single phone call. Elon broke down. He couldn't believe it. But the war wasn't over. Tesla was still dying. The NASA money couldn't be used for Tesla. That would be illegal commingling of funds. Tesla needed its own miracle. The financing round Elon had cobbled together, $20 million from his own pocket, the last of it, and $20 million from existing investors, was hanging by a thread. The deal had to be signed by 6 p.m. Vantage Point was still trying to block it, refusing to sign the paperwork, hoping to run out the clock. Elon spent the entire day on conference calls, screaming at lawyers, cajoling investors, threatening, begging. He pulled every lever he had. He convinced the other investors to restructure the deal to turn the debt into equity, a move that would dilute Vantage Point and bypass their veto. It was a legal loophole, a Hail Mary pass thrown in the final seconds of the Super Bowl. The clock was ticking. 4 p.m. 5 p.m. The lawyers were frantically typing, faxing, and emailing. At 5:50 p.m., 10 minutes before the deadline, the final signature came through. The money was wired. Tesla was saved with literally minutes to spare. Elon collapsed. He had done the impossible. He had saved both companies on the same day, on Christmas Eve, in the middle of the worst economic depression since the 1930s. He had walked through the fire and come out the other side without getting burned. Well, almost. He was broke personally. He was exhausted. He was traumatized. But his companies were alive. That night, as the world celebrated Christmas, Elon Musk slept for the first time in months. He had stared into the abyss, and for the first time the abyss had blinked. The year 2008 didn't just save Elon Musk's companies. It fundamentally rewrote his DNA. It took a brilliant, optimistic internet entrepreneur and forged him into something harder, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. The trauma of that year created the Elon Musk we know today. When people look at his behavior now, the erratic tweets, the demands for hardcore work ethics, the sleeping on the floor of the Twitter headquarters, the ruthless firing of executives who say something can't be done, they often call it eccentricity or arrogance. They are wrong. It is not arrogance. It is scar tissue. It is a form of corporate PTSD. Elon Musk lives in a perpetual state of wartime CEO mode because he knows, with a visceral, terrifying certainty, how quickly peace can turn into the apocalypse. He knows that the distance between being the king of the world and being a bankrupt failure is not measured in years, but in hours. He learned on that Christmas Eve that safety is an illusion. He learned that investors will stab you in the back the moment they smell blood. He learned that the media will write your obituary while you are still breathing. This experience created his famous glass eater mentality. He realized that to do big things, to change the course of history, you must have a tolerance for pain that is superhuman. You must be willing to suffer more than your enemies. You must be willing to stand in the fire when everyone else runs for the water. Today, Tesla is worth nearly $1 trillion. SpaceX is the most valuable private company on Earth, launching more rockets than entire nations. But Elon never forgets. He never relaxes. He keeps the memory of 2008 close to him, like a knife in his pocket. It is the fuel that drives him to Mars. He knows that he got lucky. He knows that if that NASA call had come one day later, or if one investor had said no, or if the fax machine had jammed at 5:55 p.m., we wouldn't be talking about him today. We would be talking about a footnote in history, a cautionary tale about a guy who tried to do too much. This awareness of his own mortality makes him relentless. It makes him paranoid. It makes him push his teams to the breaking point because he believes that comfort is the precursor to death. He believes that the moment you stop fighting for survival is the moment you start dying. So the next time you see Elon do something crazy, something risky, something that makes no sense to a rational person, remember the man who stood on the edge of the cliff on Christmas Eve. Remember that he is playing with house money now. In his mind, he already lost everything in 2008, so he has nothing left to fear. He has already stared into the abyss, and he realized that the only way to keep the abyss from staring back is to build a rocket and fly away from it. This story is the ultimate proof that going through hell is the price of admission for heaven. Elon Musk's 2008 is a lesson for every dreamer, every entrepreneur, and every person fighting a battle they think they can't win. It teaches us that the darkest hour really is just before the dawn, but only if you refuse to close your eyes. Now, I want to turn this over to you, the jury of the internet. I want you to put yourself in Elon's shoes in that cold December. Would you have made the same choice? If you had $30 million left, your last lifeline, would you have split the money and risked losing everything to save both dreams? Or would you have played it safe, sacrificed one company, and guaranteed the survival of the other? Tell me in the comments below. Type Team Risk if you would have gone all in on both, or Team Safe if you would have saved one. I will be reading your answers and hearting the most honest ones. If this deep dive into Elon's darkest hour inspired you, if it gave you a new respect for the pain behind the billions, please destroy that like button. It helps us defeat the algorithm and share these raw truths with the world. And if you are not subscribed, you are missing the best documentary content on YouTube. Subscribe and turn on notifications right now. In the next video, we are going to fast forward to another crisis, another moment where the Iron Man almost broke. We will look at the production hell of the Model 3, where Elon slept on the factory floor, fired everyone, and almost lost Tesla. Again, this is Musk Untold. See you in the next chaos.